kick it, Jackie Chan.
Hello, and welcome to this edition of MBC News. I'm Douglas Arthur Mensa.
And I'm Megan Rubson.
And for this edition, we have a little bit of a different broadcast going on today. Instead of our original one with our stories, we took a unique turn to it.
As a crew, we always try to cover the fun and important things going on around Mason. And as always, we are committed to bringing you the news of the students making the news.
That's right, Megan. And this month is Black History Month. And though we do talk about it in our class from time to time, we never really go in depth about how it affects our society.
You're right, and we've been working really hard behind the scenes and are really excited to have put together a panel of 3 prominent faces in the media to discuss the importance of this month and how we can continue to create a conversation throughout our community.
Lana Sacker and Simone Scott sat down with 3 prominent Cincinnati journalists, Byron McCauley, Kristen Swiley, and Ryan Houston, to talk about their experiences discussing issues around race and culture.
Let's take a look.
Hello everyone, I'm Lana Sacker.
And I'm Simone Scott. We are so excited today. We have some very special guests that are here and are going to be talking with us.
Today we have Ryan Houston, anchor at WCPO. We also have Kristen Swiley, who is a reporter at WCPO. And finally, Byron McCauley, who is a columnist at the Cincinnati Enquirer.
So with February being Black History Month, you have those people who question why we need a whole month to celebrate Black history. So what do you say to those people? What is the importance of Black History Month to you?
I'll go first since I'm the first one up. Black History Month is important just because Black history is America's history. And Black history, it started as a week by Carter G. Woodson several years ago, and then it sort of morphed into something that turned out to be several weeks of celebrating the accomplishments of Black people because it was sort of overlooked during that time. So I say we still need it, and it's important that we remember that Black history is not just Black history or for Blacks. It's everybody's history. We are all in this together.
Sure. I would definitely agree with Brian said that we're all interconnected and that we do spend all of our year talking about the contributions of everyone from around the country, but we can sometimes overlook the contributions of minorities. And it's important, I think, for school-age children all the way up through adults to constantly be reminded of all the different contributions that African Americans made just for the self-esteem of kids growing up, no matter where they're from, knowing that anything is possible. And so I think it can only be positive reinforcement, and I would challenge anyone for a good reason why we shouldn't have it.
Yeah. So I'm of 2 minds on this issue. I've written that we should eliminate Black History Month and incorporate Black history every day. And, my argument has been kind of philosophical because, as Ryan said earlier, Black history has been written out of history largely. When you can have a contemporary argument about blackface, for instance, with a governor of a state, and to know that, just 30 years ago, that was part of his sort of activities, that tells me that he hadn't known enough. He hadn't been taught enough, or maybe he didn't care. But the second mind that I'm on is now that we do see sort of this new proliferation of things that are going on, we do need more information. We do need to set aside this month, I think, not just to look at the accomplishments and all about those things, but to really have conversations like these, to talk about why it's important. So my argument was that have it every day, right? Incorporate it. That takes a lot because we use textbooks in our education, and it takes a lot to get there. But there are a lot of other resources as well.
Well, with you all being in journalism, you're often taught to steer away from bias, and you might be called out for having racial bias or being racist. What do you guys think is the difference between being racist and having racial bias, and when is it appropriate to use each term?
Do I have to go first again?
No, I will go.
You can totally mix it up.
Okay,
Yeah.
ladies
I'll
first.
go.
Kristen's
Thanks.
totally different.
Yeah. I think everyone has inherent bias. Just, based on their sexuality, their gender, their race, everything else. And I think the biggest key is just recognizing what you walk into every story with and the baggage that you carry and trying to let that inform, how you work but not influence it. I'm doing a story that's airing tonight about the first Black woman elected to the Ohio Supreme Court. And she talks about when she was out on the campaign trail, people asked her, which way do you lean? And she says, I don't. It's like she's the first Black woman elected to that statewide office, but she still follows the letter of the law. And the part where her being African American comes in is when people say, should we take this case? And she says, I think this case is important because of this, and something that another perspective that another justice might not have. And so I see real parallels there between her role and our role as journalists. We still have like this, set of ethics that we follow, but we all bring our unique perspective. So I think that we all have inherent biases of all sorts, including racial bias, but I think racism, is just that plus hate, I guess. So that's my perspective on it.
And I'll go. That's a terrific question, by the way. Early in my career, one of my bosses asked me, as a reporter, are you African American first or reporter first? And I had to think about that. I was offended, of course, but I did think about it because I said I'm a reporter when I'm doing this work, but I bring my unique experiences as an African American man who grew up in a rural area that I just carry with me. So here many years later, I have to. Yes, I have these experiences because this is who I am. But as Kristen said, we have to be objective. There's no one, I think, that is not biased because of the way they grew up or the way they've learned or whoever they're influenced by. But as a reporter, you have to make sure you check that and constantly check what you're doing when you're gathering your news, when you're reporting it. You have to check it because it's there. You just have to check it.
I agree with everything they're saying. I feel like racism is, in my mind, it's described like this. A group of people thinking that they are better or superior to another group of people. And racial bias, a good example of that would be early on in my career, in another state. I had a manager who, he was of a different race. And he would just walk up to me and go, yo, 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 what's up? And I'm like, good morning. So in my mind, I don't think he was racist, but I think that in his mind, he had a stereotypical way of speaking to a Black person, and I don't think he really meant anything by it. So like they said, we all have those bias, and it's up to us as individuals to leave those at the door, report the facts, get all sides, and let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah. So how can we as individuals in society, how can we kind of learn to check our bias and make sure that those offensive things are not being said or those actions aren't being said, that we check our bias, we don't make those rush judgments, just as you do as reporters and writers?
I feel like it's important to have these conversations. It's important to talk to people who don't look like you, who maybe they don't go to the school district. It's important to have friends of different races, sexes, and it teaches you about different types of people. Because if you go your whole life and you're around one set of people, you'll have these stereotypical things in your head about, well, these type of people do this or these type of people do that. But the more we interact with each other, the more we become friends, the more we go to dinner together or parties or whatever you young kids do these days, the more we interact, just the better off we'll be. And you'll say, oh, well, no, that you shouldn't say that because, I have a friend who told me that's offensive. And you just sort of learn those things along the way.
You know, I totally agree. The importance of diversity and trying to, again, not necessarily get rid of, you know, your life experience and how that informs your work, but just being aware of it and being in spaces where people think differently from you politically and come from different backgrounds from you. I think that really helps you stay aware of it. And then you guys kind of keep each other in check just by being like, hey, I think you might be, you know, looking at this way, how about if you consider this perspective, and then kind of going back to that same, the prior answer of knowing where you're coming from and then having other people around you who are also well-intentioned to kind of check each other.
Yeah, we look at ourselves and my family as sort of quiet teachers, right? We have so many different relationships with so many different people, conservatives and liberals, and I mean, when you name it, and everybody, I would say, who you know, in this room, and people who just interact with people every day, you bring that to the table, and wherever you are and whatever you're doing, you have an opportunity to teach, and you have an opportunity to learn. And so that's the way I look at it. First of all, I don't assess anyone. I don't put a judgment on anyone until I know them. And the best way to know them, as has been discussed here, you know, have a meal, have a conversation, get to know them, and sort of lay aside the animosity and see people for who they are. And you can learn from them. You might walk away from the table still not agreeing on certain things, but I guarantee you that person loves their sister. That person wants to make sure the earth is going to be here in 100 years. You know, there are things you can agree on, and let that be that, right? And then focus on those things. And then you work on some other things maybe later or maybe never. But you just have to know people for who they are, where they're coming from.
Yeah. Going back on teaching people things, you wrote an article about 2 Cincinnati police officers, one African-American, one white, who used the N-word. And you wrote in the article all about the N-word, and you had compared it to yelling fire in a crowded theater. You simply don't do it. Do you think that, in a sense, it's a lesser of two evils if an African-American were to use the N-word over a white male or individual, or is it no, it's wrong and you just don't say it? Because I feel like people could really be taught on the impact that it has based on your race.
Sure.
That's a really good question.
It is.
I'm glad you're going first.
Well, you know, I got some definite ideas around that. I talked very candidly and honestly in that column that the N-word has been part of my, the use of the N-word has been part of my family forever since I can remember, in one way or the other. And in a lot of African American families, it's used almost as a term of endearment, and that's how I wrote about it with a cousin's husband, I believe. His name was Roy, and that was his nickname. When you're brought up in a certain environment and you hear it, you don't even have the context around it sometimes, because if you start hearing it from the time you were a child, you're just like, okay, that's who that is.
Yeah.
But then as you get an opportunity to learn and you grow, that word's offensive, no matter who uses it. And so that's where I am now. And I know that, you know, when you look at hip hop music, you can look at a lot of, you know, comedians, like that's part of art. That's part of what they do, whether they mean it harmfully or not. That's also part of it. So you have to look at that and say, okay, how is that being used? Is it being used maliciously? Is it being used as part of art? Frankly, I do think that there's no place for it, but it's really complicated.
Yes, it's a hard question to answer, and I will say I think it's pretty easy to make the argument that no one should use it at work in that role, and that the effects that would have, that just wouldn't be acceptable for any of us. We'd be gone tomorrow if we use that. We're today. To be clear, today, and we're all African American. I do think it is a complicated conversation, and I think it's an important one that African Americans have. I think sometimes worried or frustrated when I feel like the conversation is only brought up as a way to say, well, you guys say it, so it's not a big, it must not be a big deal. I think there is a lot of nuance to the usage of it, and I think that's something that we're all still figuring out. I think in an ideal world, it doesn't get used anymore, but it is a part of our culture at this point. So I think in the interim, while we continue to work through the usage or non-usage of the word, I've heard this parallel made before too, where women will say something to each other. I've heard that certain groups will say something to each other, and then they want anyone outside the group to say it. I think, given all that African Americans have been through, we are owed that, and we are allowed to work through that. And while we figure out how we're going to move past the word, but it's offensive. It shouldn't be used, but I do understand that there's a lot of nuance, and it's still a conversation that we're working through. And I wish I had a more definitive answer, because I really don't.
But Ryan does.
No, I don't. I was just sitting here thinking, like, how am I gonna answer this one? I'll agree with what everybody is saying. It was a word that, coming from the South, that was used in my family growing up, and it just had a different meaning. So the first time that I was called that from someone of a different race while I was waiting tables at a restaurant in college, it didn't have the effect that I think that person wanted it to have on me, just because I had heard the word so much that it didn't. I'm like, is that the best you can do? So I agree with them. It should never be used, at all. I feel like, rappers and comedians and those in the arts, they sort of get a pass because of, free speech and everything dealing with that. But it should never be used at all. And there's so many different sides to it that, growing up hearing it, one would come to know that it should never be used at all.
Yeah.
It's a great question.
Thank you for your responses.
Yeah, so a huge reason why we wanted you here is because as individuals in media, you're up close and personal with what's going on in Cincinnati, in our community. You're the ones breaking the news, you're commenting on the news. So have there been moments where you've been like, okay, maybe we aren't making those great strides in race relations that people say we are?
I think it's been striking for me. It's interesting that all three of us, I didn't realize before we got here, are from or have lived in different parts of the South. And I'm from Atlanta originally. And I think growing up in the South, you're always taught, like, the South is so problematic. And if you're talking about Cincinnati in particular, and the contrast to that, like, the South is just, it's got to be so hard for people of color. And so growing up in Atlanta, I was like, I don't really feel that way, but if this is as bad as it gets, like, Cincinnati's going to be that much better. And I got up here and it was not. It was, I think that I was surprised, to learn just how segregated of a city we sometimes can be. I think Mason's more diverse than a lot of different schools. You guys are fortunate in that way. But and that's obviously still an issue that, all the different schools are sort of working through. But I think that's honestly, in my opinion, a root of some of the strife that we're going through right now. And a lot of different stories that we've been covering recently and over the past couple of years is just what a divide there is. I was surprised by the fact that the idea that to me that we have not made as much progress as I thought we had. And I think that goes back to some of the earlier points of kind of that separation and living in silos that I was not aware of. So that was super striking to me. Again, as someone from the South, you think, a Black person from the South would, you move further north and you think things are going to be better. And I actually found kind of the opposite in terms of collaboration and working together to be true. So I hope that changes, because I think we have great people up here and a lot of people who are accepting and willing to have these conversations that we're having now. But I just think we need to have a lot more of that, and if we're going to progress and not keep seeing some of the stories that we keep seeing. So
we have progressed so much from the time that Black people could not drink from the same water fountains as white people. But as Kristen said, Cincinnati and really the nation, and when we look at the conversations that are going on here, we have somewhat, I think we've had somewhat of a regression. You have, look at us. We have great media jobs, right? We're on TV and we're writers and all kinds of things, and we're all kind of in this room together, with many different races. But I think, if you look at the macro, we have some work to do still. And I think, again, as we said earlier, if you can take every person independently as you meet them and get to know people, I think that's one way to go. But we also need to make sure that when corporate America is hiring, make sure that they have a pipeline of diverse people, because that's where we meet typically as adults on the workplace. And then, as Kristen also said, we talked about schools. Schools are pretty increasingly segregated here. And the only way that we were able to get people to know each other was through getting people to go to school together. And so that was the hope, right? But parents sort of vote with their feet. You go to a better school district, and usually that school district may not be in the urban core, and that urban core, you have the haves and you have the have-nots, and sometimes you have, really great options everywhere, but that's pretty rare. So we have to fix it in the beginning, and we have to fix it sort of when we get to corporate as well. And I think those are the two cases that we must do to make sure that we're getting better at this, because people will use it politically to pit us against one another, and that's just not who we are as Americans. We have to do better, because we have to move forward together.
I haven't experienced any racism since I've been here in Cincinnati, but I will have friends who move here to work for some of the big companies. And they'll say, "Oh my God, it's so racist there. Oh, I'm the only black person there. They treat me like this. They treat me like that." And then I'll go, "Well, I don't get that. People don't treat me like that. People are nice to me, and maybe it's your personality, maybe it's this." And this friend is like, "Well, maybe people treat you that way because you're on TV. So you're looked at in a different light or in a different way." I would just say that just the more that we come together and, have lunch together and join different clubs, maybe, go to different churches, and the more we interact, the better we will be. I don't think Cincinnati is the worst place by far that I've lived in terms of race relations. But I will agree with everybody here that there is definitely room for growth.
Yeah. And, I think a lot of it kind of stems from social media, or any media outlet for that being. And I think a lot of people use that as an escape or a way to fight hate with hate. And we live in a world where we do that. So you guys might have used social medias for your own voice and to speak up. And there's obviously a lot of positives that come out of that. People can learn from it. But there's also negatives with it too, as we've seen. When do you think, where's that point where you cross that fine line between trying to be informative and expressing how you feel versus just downright being hateful?
I always lean forward in a positive way on social media, because that doesn't die. Whatever you put on social media, it's going to be there forever. So I'll obviously try to amplify my work, and that stands on its own. But when I'm on social media and I'm giving people kudos, or I'm saying it's full of praise, I don't criticize, because I think it's just fraught with unfortunate circumstances. Yeah.
So. Mm-hmm. And I think all three of us are pretty careful about, because we are in the positions that we're in, about what we put out, and trying not to, I may share a story and you may guess how I feel about that story, or not based on knowing me in person, but just trying to to further the conversation, trying to introduce things in a positive way, and then letting the dialogue kind of, for the most part, fall where it may. There are some things where, like, I monitor my fan page and I make sure that things don't disintegrate too much. But it's getting hard. It's getting harder and harder, I think, by the day, to have an issues-based debate and discussion and conversation, because I feel like we are kind of going into our extreme corners and then fighting from opposite ends of the room. And so I don't know the best way to kind of meet in the middle in terms of, but for those who are interested in going into journalism and kind of filling similar roles to what we have, I would just say if someone poses a question either to you on Twitter or Facebook or anything else, and if you feel like you're kind of being baited into something, is to just try and respond calmly with the facts that you have and not engage too much with people who are basically trolls. Like, there's always going to be someone who's just trying to infuse hate into every situation that they can and trying to, get something between you all to go viral or something like that too. You just never know what people's motivations are. So try and find those voices on all the different platforms that are genuinely trying to engage in discussion, and follow those, and then try and block the rest out as best you can, because feeding it, I don't think helps.
I try to always stay positive. I think twice about what I post, and the students who will be watching this, they should think twice, because companies are definitely going through Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, before they will hire you for jobs, and that really became an issue right as I graduated college. But you want to think twice about what you post, and sometimes everything doesn't deserve a response. Like, if a viewer writes something on my page that I just can't, think of a great way to respond, I'll just not respond, or either I'll go to management or whoever is over social media and say, how do I respond to this? What should I say? And just keep it simple.
So we are the next generation. So how can we use our voices for effective communication and make those changes that need to happen?
Just what I said earlier. The more we can cohabitate together, or maybe learn to share the same space and time in a friendly and an open way, the better off we'll be. The more you find people who don't look like you, who don't talk like you, it just gives you, in my mind, a better view of the world, and it makes you a well-rounded person. Because if you're around all just one type of people, you're going to be missing out on those other experiences that you will need in this big world, because everybody is different. But like he mentioned earlier, we are all the same. We still love our moms. We want to, we like Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, sushi, barbecue, chili if it's here in Cincinnati. So we all have at least one or two things that we all share in common, besides just the color of our skin.
I just want to say, I think you guys are in a really good space in terms of, this next generation, hopefully at some point is able to come together a little bit more than our current generation is. And you're able to, in terms of communication, reach so many more people on such a broader level, again, because of social media, and hopefully do it in a positive way. And so I think it's kind of the culmination of everything we've been talking about here today, of being in those diverse spaces, recognizing your inherent biases and different things like that will better help you inform your generation, the generation to follow that. And then I think you guys are probably better at all these different social mediums and different ways of reaching audiences than any of us here. So I think you guys are, in general, just in a really, really, really good space in terms of good footing to kind of push forward and continue the discussion from there.
I would say pay attention to what's in the middle of the Venn diagram. Lead from that. Be your authentic self. Do no harm, and love others as much as you can. Because that's really sort of the only way that you're going to move forward in a positive way. There are those who are outside the Venn diagram, they're going to always be there. But you have to figure out, okay, we've got these 5 things in common. So how do we move that forward? It's really what my 2 colleagues have said. And so that's how you move forward. You also have access to more information than anybody in the history of the universe. And you have to be really careful with that. So think about that as well.
I think that we can all learn that there's more to all of us than just our race, our ethnicity, the religion, what we believe in. Right. So we appreciate your guys' time and for giving us such well responses. I think we all walked away with a little bit more knowledge. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
It was
Thanks
so
for
great
having
talking
us.
to you, and I think that the student body will really learn a lot and really start conversations within our school and within our community. So again, thank you. We really appreciate it.
We do.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Wow, I think it's really great that we were able to sit down with 3 journalists and discuss issues about how to understand and appreciate all races.
You know, you're absolutely right. And taking the time to talk about the issues within our society is what allows us to open up a conversation. And when you can open up a conversation, you can create change.
You're right. We thank you all so much for your respect and for viewing this broadcast.
We would like to give a special thanks to Byron, Ryan, and Kristen for taking time out of their busy schedules to help us create something so unique. This has been a tremendous learning experience for not only our broadcast team, but hopefully you viewers as well.
As always, we could not have done this without our fantastic crew in front of and behind the cameras. I'm Douglas Arthur-Mensa.
I'm Megan Rupsa.
Today's broadcast was brought to you by The Comet Zone. The Comet Zone at Mason High School. We have all your spirit needs, from your classic black hole t-shirts to your favorite and most popular comfort tees. Pick up some trendy Comet accessories, classroom novels, and Mason Comet novelties. The Comet Zone can also create custom gear for your team, club, or organization. The Comet Zone. Get in the zone.